All right, being good project managers, it is 12:01 p.m., right on time. I think we can get started, Kristen. Think so?
Yeah, let's
All
get
right.
started.
All right. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending. This is going to be a lot of fun. My name is Ron Welter, and I'm one of your hosts.
And I'm Kristen Cleveland, also one of your hosts. And we've created this webinar in response to many questions that we've heard, such as what is project management like in life sciences, or how can I transition into it? And Ron, you and I've been getting these questions for how many years? How many years have we been working together?
It's been 4 years.
Four?
4 since you interviewed me,
Okay.
Kristen. You know, and that's something that actually might come up later.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get going. So every good presentation starts with an agenda, and here's ours. So we will start with introductions briefly of Kristen and myself. Then we'll start at a high-level description of life sciences, overall, globally, and then drill down into the specifics of life sciences in the Boston area. And we'll transition, get a perspective from the national and regional before we get to the Boston. Then we'll get to the main purpose of this webinar, which is to talk about project management in life sciences. We'll include some discussion on techniques and paths to transition into this area. And I really want to note that this is a high-level introduction. There's only so much we can touch on in this short period of time. So we tried very hard to find the salient points, the things that are really important to be able to cover. And we do expect this session to be the foundation for future webinars.
Right, Ron. And this will be high level and yet still include the important aspects that'll help you, the project manager, learn to be successful in this area. And that means we're going to be discussing frameworks and regulations that are core to life sciences. And they will also help you be the successful project manager. So with that, my name is Kristen Cleveland. I've been an IT project manager for quite some time now. I've worked exclusively in IT for my whole career. And right now I'm working for a cool company specializing in the confluence of science and technology. And if you actually look at my LinkedIn profile, it says I'm happy as a clam at BioTeam.
And I have to say that I'm happy as a clam where I am as well. And my experience is a little more diverse. Been through different industries and different technologies and different areas professionally, from operations to engineering. And I have to say that the most challenging and the most fulfilling that I've experienced have been particularly these last 5 years in the life sciences, doing what I'm doing. So as we get into this, let's jump in by making this personal. You know, just as we're happy, Kristen and I are happy to see so many old friends on the line
Right.
who are going to be part of this. Kristen, I know you are passionate about this. And can you provide a little more information on your story?
Yeah. So I have a tremendous passion for this industry and the work that we're doing. And it stems from a few years back when I was asked by the head of the PMO of a large biotech to lead a program. It had components of networking and storage and compute and cloud bursting. And that created a whole separate scientific network. The technology was fairly impressive, 100 gig networking. If you're not familiar with networking, that was 10 times the size of what the whole entire corporation used on a daily basis. And it had 1.5 petabytes of storage. And again, just for comparison, the entire company generated storage growth of 1 to 2 terabytes a year. And cloud bursting capabilities that meant almost an unlimited number of cores for compute. We had 5,000 cores on-prem. So what this resulted in is 2 weeks after we went live with our implementation, our scientists ran an experiment and they spun up 27,000 cores of compute in the cloud, and that returned results to them in less than a week that yielded a patent for the company. And it hit me that the discoveries of the future are going to be made using computers and what we had just built. And I was a part of that. And we were enabling the pace of science to pick up and support the fast-moving world of early discovery research. And this just blew my mind. I'm not a scientist. Like, that ship has sailed. I'll never be one. But I can support science, and I can use it with skills I already have in my back pocket as an IT project manager. And I share this because it is one common area that people want to experience, that familiar feeling of being part of something bigger than themselves. And if you're looking for a career in an industry that has altruistic benefits, then you might be one of the people who wants to ask, how can I get into IT project management in life sciences if I don't have a science background and I have no experience in life sciences?
And our answer is, keep listening to us.
Yeah.
Seriously, we will get to this, and we'll be providing options that can help you. Yet we feel it's important to provide some background information that you'll see at the end that the information we're going to provide will help your transition more effective. So with that, let's start at the top, and Kristen, I will need your help here.
Yeah. So I've spent a lot of time in this area, and I'll do my best. But starting at the top, let's review what is life sciences. And a formal definition is the study of living organisms. And on this slide, we're showing you just a small sampling of related subjects. But I like how it depicts that they all fit together. And yet, when working in any one area, there could be a connection to another. And what I think is important to glean from this slide is the wide breadth of subject matter that life sciences covers. And I've worked with people in IT who have gotten jobs in companies, in biotech companies, who are working on neurodegenerative diseases because they had family members who were affected by neurodegenerative diseases, and they were deeply committed to helping to find treatments and cures. And maybe you've been personally affected by something like cancer. And there are a lot of companies that work on drug treatments and even immunotherapies as treatments targeting certain cancers. There's just so much work going on in life sciences that this slide is trying to open your eyes to the wide variety that comprises life sciences.
Okay, so Kristen, just pause for a minute. Just to understand this slide myself, are you saying that the cell biology area here in and of itself is a study or an area of study, as is oncology, yet at a particular company, in a particular study or project, you can work on them simultaneously?
Yeah, exactly. And the same project could have aspects of toxicology and molecular biology. The science itself can be extremely complex. Just imagine all the historical information available for scientists to reference and the possible infinite numbers of variations for experimentation, the vast amount of data to be sifted through, saved, and analyzed. Technology is an enabler for science to be more productive. And in some cases, the sheer volumes of data, petabytes, can't be understood without the aid of compute power for algorithms. And many scientists have had to teach themselves IT just to run their computer models and experiments. But even a seasoned scientist will tell you they're way more interested in the actual science than the technology. And that's why the implementation and management of that technology needs experienced IT project managers.
You know, that's really interesting, especially when combined with the importance of Boston in regard to life sciences.
Yeah, and actually life sciences is important to all of New England, not just Boston. And I love this picture. It comes from MassBio, the Massachusetts Biotechnology Council, and it shows some of the familiar companies and their locations and logos throughout New England. So if you think you don't live close to biotech in New England, you got to think again. With life sciences, New England area is known as Gene Town. It's kind of a play on the whole Beantown thing. And with the proximity to great colleges and hospitals, many companies just feel right at home here. And in fact, there are several key venture capital groups ensuring that this area continues to invest in the life sciences market. That's very important. But let's focus on Massachusetts itself. And again, this slide might be a little harder to read. This is from MassBio. There's some interesting facts on here about biotech across Massachusetts in particular. Shire, Sanofi, EMD Serono, AbbVie, Biogen. This slide talks about the different areas of the state which are popular with various companies. And like I said, the proximity to great colleges and hospitals makes Massachusetts just a natural fit for life sciences. The top 4 National Institutes of Health funded hospitals in the United States are here. 48 colleges are in Massachusetts. And in almost every town in Massachusetts, you'll find at least 1 or 2 companies of varying size, of course, and some hotbeds like Cambridge. There are around 250 companies doing life sciences. So if you live in Massachusetts, you should be asking, how do I get a job as a PM in life sciences? There's just never a shortage of employment. But not to stray too far away from what I'm most passionate about, and that is the impact life sciences has on real people, on the patients themselves. And again, from MassBio, here are statistics on the patient impact of the great work done just in Massachusetts alone. And if you as a project manager in other industries, you might be wondering, why am I doing this insert IT project work here? And you just know in your heart, you could be doing a lot more to give back. And you're wondering, like, how can I do that? Just look at these numbers, right? In the US alone, there's 265 million patients in the US that have been personally impacted by treatments that have come out of Massachusetts. And if that doesn't boggle your mind, then how about the rest of the world's patient population? That's around 2 billion people. And you don't need to look outside your own Facebook friends list to personally know patients who are in need of therapies and, more importantly, cures for diseases. This hits home for a lot of us. And I hope that exemplifies the source of the passion that I and so many others experience in this industry. These are real people who are impacted by my work.
Yeah, you know, and that is really humbling to be part of an industry that has such a profound impact on patient lives. And there's also profound impact on the lives of people who are all like you who are working in it.
Right.
So let's talk about Boston. Boston is a recognized global biotech leader. Depending on the survey, the top two biopharma clusters, or the top two in the United States would be San Francisco or Boston. There are some differences. Some of the things where Boston is the leader in is that there's the largest number of awards for the National Institute of Health funding. 2169 awards for over $1 billion. It has the greatest amount of lab space at nearly 20 million square feet. And this is a stat just on Boston and Cambridge. So there will be other measures if you're looking at lab space in other areas, but as the chart that Chris and I pointed out earlier, Boston and Cambridge really have the greatest density of life science and biopharma companies. And Boston is the leader in pharmaceutical and drug discovery activity as compared to as compared to San Francisco. In San Francisco, they have a more diverse life sciences community. So again, the statistics will vary, but they're both very strong areas. And looking at the growth that's estimated in Boston, it's about 17% they're estimating through 2022. Maybe not as fast as in recent areas, but something that's consistent. So there's always going to be a need for people, Kristen, doing the things like we do.
Right.
Looking at the employment levels, again, some statistics can vary, but one report is Boston and Cambridge alone, they have 50,000 people who are employed in bioscience related work.
Wow.
Across Massachusetts, 66,000 in biopharma. Again, to the impact, that's $9.2 billion in annual wages. Mm-hmm. Looking at just the R&D area in the biopharma, Massachusetts employs 34,000 people in that. So that's a lot. And if you look outside the life sciences, the Boston business climate is hot for other reasons. It has a low unemployment rate. It reported in September where the Massachusetts unemployment rate was 3.9%. The Boston rate was 3.4%. And with the October Massachusetts unemployment rate being even lower, we would expect it being even lower in Boston. So there's a high demand. Boston is, from what I read, is being recognized as a growing center for global cybersecurity threats. We have a lot of companies who have their own security departments who are impacted. You consider all the intellectual property at all the biopharma companies in the area, that they need to protect it. So cybersecurity is very important. And that translates to it being an area where there's a lot of research and a lot of rigor around maintaining security. Kristen had mentioned before about the medical care. I mean, we all know that Boston is recognized as a global center for fantastic medical care. And we have 25 hospitals just in Boston alone, 20 community health centers. And part of its popularity, its renown, is as teaching hospitals. And there's 46,000 scientists, researchers, and staff just in Boston, about 21,000 students who are learning at the hospitals. We also hear a lot about innovation. That Boston is considered a global hub of innovation. There's many accelerators, there's many incubators. Mass Challenge is one that has global popularity, and I know Mass Challenge actually has offices in other countries such as Israel. And a lot of the startups that are taking place in the biopharma are in Cambridge. It was recognized as one of the top places to start a company, but also not just in biopharma and life sciences, but just in any sort of innovative, entrepreneurial startup. That Cambridge and the Boston area is very popular.
So I mean, I guess it goes with almost without saying, right, that every industry needs IT and computers for improving productivity. It's a common enabler of businesses these days. And in life sciences, this is particularly true. In the past decade, with the rise of the Human Genome Project and lab instruments to decode DNA, the volume that labs produce easily eclipses what a large 5,000 to 10,000 person organization can generate through common business applications over the course of an entire year. Just let that sink in. These labs are producing volumes of data on a daily basis that eclipse what an enormous organization produces in a year. So in life sciences, data are crown jewels of the company. They're the assets on which revenues are made or lost. And just imagine storing, moving, analyzing, categorizing, governing that data, and being able to do it well is going to be paramount to success for business. The concept of big data are especially apparent in life sciences. They've given rise to things like data lakes, data commons, other very large IT initiatives geared towards making data an asset for the company. And data sciences is in particularly high demand. Making your data useful and turning it into a competitive advantage is definitely a hot commodity. Sharing data and breaking down corporate silos, even pre-competitive silos, have replaced this old crusty notion that data are like children. You love yours the best, and you don't want anyone to touch them. But now there's a demand, and sometimes in some countries there's even some legislation that are pushing for open data sharing to the extent that foundational information, not like the secret sauce and not the crown jewels, but the basic agreed upon known biological information is open and freely accessible to all researchers. So this is an exciting time to be in IT and life sciences. The generation of data collection and data sharing will shape all future discoveries of life sciences. Yeah, so here's some background. The background that we provided will help us get to that answer to that question that we've heard so much. How can I transition into IT project management and life sciences in Boston? And so let's look at how a typical life science company is structured. It has a lot of departments you'd expect to see, and there might be some that are new to you. But if you focus on the departments that are familiar, you're going to get your bearings very quickly in this industry. And the other departments you're likely to hear about and you might encounter through the normal course of IT project management. And just a quick overview of some of the different departments. Government affairs in the upper left corner there, the brick in the upper left corner. It deals with, you guessed it, the government. A lot of life science companies depend on legislation and funding from the government, and NIH grants and reimbursements and drug costs. They're all heavily dependent on the government. And this department keeps an eye on all things related to government. And moving over next door to that is R&D. So R&D is not new to this industry, but it's a little differently organized than where other industries might have R&D. So research, which is one arm of R&D, is the white coat scientist domain, right? It's the labs, they've got pipettes, they've got big refrigerators with samples and lab equipment and shiny stainless steel, everything. And sometimes there's animal labs in part of the research side of the house. They're the ones who figure out what gene, what compound, what device, what test, what drug will be developed. And they're the laboratories and analytics to support whether it's a good idea or not. A fun fact about research, 99% of what scientists study ends in failure. And only about 1% of what research works on actually makes it out of the lab and into the waiting hands of the development side of the house, the D side. So the second half of the R&D is D, and they're in charge with overseeing clinical trials and all regulatory aspects of putting a product, like a drug or a medical device, into a human body. So there's a lot of testing and oversight before a product ever reaches the human, for a pretty good reason. And the entire R&D process for one drug product could take up to 12 years before it's finally approved. And I think a lot of people complain about that. There are some exceptions. Orphan drugs, for example, Genzyme is one of the companies that produces orphan drugs. And if you are interested, check out the movie Extraordinary Measures, which was about an orphan drug produced by Genzyme for Pompe disease. The FDA has cleared the way for faster approvals for orphan drugs. That's something you might want to research before you go in for a job interview. All right, let's get into quality assurance, QA. So our colleagues on the phone who are already project managers in IT and life sciences could probably roll their eyes right now or smile, because they know I'm going to get into the fact that this is the department that you will encounter. You will either have a good experience or a not so good experience working with them. You might roll your eyes and launch into your war wound stories. But either way, I don't mean to malign this department. They're very important. And the QA department oversees many different areas of the business and usually has a very strong presence within IT, and especially for the software development lifecycle. They're the ones who oversee validation. That's with a big V, and we will get into that in a future slide. But also, before we leave this slide, metrology is a unique department. They oversee the calibration of all the lab instruments, microscopes, DNA sequencers, even refrigerators and freezers. And they're responsible to prove that the instruments are functioning correctly and they aren't unduly influencing or tanking an experiment.
Kristen, that's all a lot of good information.
Sorry.
So no, that's really good. So we're going to start drilling down into the IT system details. So let's pause and take a look at where we've been and how we structure this. We've tried to provide this overview of life sciences in general, what it is, how it's described, or the components of it. We've described the Boston business client to show how important life sciences is to Boston. Now we're drilling down into the IT component and the details that Kristen just provided, describing some differences in the business structure of a life science company. Now we're going to get into the commonalities between a life science company and other companies and the IT components, and then break out, as we're drilling down into the detail, how some differences with the life science company IT. So with that, there are common IT systems across many industries. We bucketed it this way. It just was convenient for a presentation. In office productivity, infrastructure, legal, human resources, and finance. First, taking a look at the office productivity, we all use email.
Right.
We often all use the same thing. It was often Microsoft Office and local clients and then network, and now it's moving to the cloud. So those are the implementations of the systems and the upgrades and the product maintenance. Those are all common IT projects because they're all common IT systems. SharePoint is another example of that. It's a collaboration software, and depending on the industry you are in, there might be different rules or how you deploy it, but it's still just a standard application. Moving into infrastructure, there's networks, there's storage, there's data centers. Depending on the company and the industry, they may be on-premise, they may be in the cloud, there may be varying levels of size needed. Kristen, you're talking about petabytes of data. So not only for that infrastructure, you have the storage capacity, but you also have not just the internet, but internet too, whereas the internet is 100 megabits per second, I think, and then 10 megabits per second transfer rate for the internet too. So that's
gigabytes.
Thank you for correcting me. So that's, again, depending on what industry you're in, that you may have some differences, but every company has a network. Every company has some level of storage or a data center. I'm going to skip over legal, move to human resources. We classified ERP in this, but it's again a corporate system. It could be Oracle, it could be SAP, it could be something else. But that's a common system that we have had people who have relatively easy said, I've worked at ERP, I've worked at Oracle, at a software services company, and then they migrate to a life sciences company. And then for the finance tools as well, it's the ERP, but the finance modules and BI tools. I skipped over legal on purpose because I find this is a little interesting, that there are legal systems and applications that are common between companies, but maybe not as widespread as, say, Olive within a particular industry. So to consider is that if you have a particular strength in a legal component for intellectual property, patent management that might be needed in one particular company, that might be a similar niche that could be useful in a life science company.
That's very true.
Yeah. So let's talk about transferable IT skills and knowledge. And I can't emphasize enough that the core PM skills are industry agnostic. It's the ability, to communicate. It's the ability to manage stakeholders and teams. Ability to plan projects, plan activities, and financial management. Those who are seasoned project managers, we know that the level of what you do is at a particular company can differ. And I've been a consultant, and Kristen, you've been full-time employee, so there are some differences in that and what you're allowed to do if you're a consultant at a company versus a full-time employment. But really, the core skills are paramount, regardless of the industry, and not listed here, which we're finding more and more important, is high emotional intelligence to be able to just manage your team.
Yep.
And there are applications that are used across multiple industries. Some of the CRM tools, some of the data sharing tools. So it might be something. Let me use an example. I was on the phone with someone just this week. And they were saying, well, I'd be interested in getting life sciences, but I don't know how to do it. And as we were talking, that person, has experience in some infrastructure technologies, some infrastructure projects. I said, well, you realize what you already know is something that life science companies also have. And so that sparked a conversation about, well, that's the opportunity,
right?
To ease into a life science company by using existing PM skills for a particular area where they have an expertise, find out how that's useful, or for what life science companies happen to have that need, and wedge in that way.
Yep.
And Kristen had mentioned about the data science project experience. If you're familiar with managing, highly intelligent people who can manage these massive amounts of data, data scientists, then you have a way into many industries, not just life sciences.
Right.
And as we all know, that the importance of data continues to grow and grow and grow because there's more and more of it out there. And with the data scientists, what their skill is being able to take out of those masses of data, extract what's important so that be most useful for the particular company that they're working for. So practical transition methods, it's nice to have the tools, nice to have the technologies, but how do you do it? And really, it's like any good project plan. You have to plan out the steps and then act on it. Know where you want to go to, know where you are, then how do you get there? So, to develop some realistic strategies, determine which business area or areas your skills apply. I gave the example before of the person in infrastructure. It could be in marketing, it could be in CRM, it could be in ERP. It could be something that a life science business absolutely needs and could need someone just like you. And so that could be your way in. It is important to research the target company and the life science area that it's in. We'll get a little more information into that, but again, we can only cover so much in this slide. Even if you are interviewing for a position or seeking a position in a life science company that is not dealing with clinical data or dealing with scientists, knowing some of the acronyms and the rules and the regulations will give you a leg up, and it is something that you can learn on your own to be able to bring that into the environment and say, I don't have the experience for this, but I understand what it is, and I understand how it would apply to the role that I'm seeking. Yep. Practice interview with your contacts in the life science. Everyone knows someone who's in it. So, buy them a cup of coffee and say, okay, what's important to your company? What questions would you ask? And from going through that, then you'd be able to hear, okay, this is what I can answer well, and this is what I can't. Can't emphasize enough, use your network. People want to help you. Just like you want to help other people, they want to help you. Don't be afraid to ask the question, I want to seek this. Go to the line above, practice interview. Don't be afraid to ask the person, can I talk to you about what your company does? Right. Use the Project Management Institute resources. They have roundtables, they have conferences, they have LinkedIn groups, they have a Facebook group, and they have webinars like this. Every little bit of information will help you. And you can also develop the contacts, which then to follow the steps above.
That's right.
All right. So Kristen, can you help us with some of, I had mentioned about the important regulations.
Yep. We've talked a lot about that. And in and out of life sciences, there are regulatory frameworks. This is not probably new to life sciences, although some of them might not be familiar to you if you're not working in the industry. I believe that a great PM has the same fundamental qualities regardless of the industry. And we discussed how hot the Boston business climate is, which drives the demand for skilled project managers. And we've gone through some real life experiences transitioning into life sciences. But now imagine, if you will, you've got the job, you're working there. And so now what's next? What are the fundamental key knowledge areas that once you understood them will help you work on those projects that were previously not available to you as an employee or a candidate? So let's talk about this, the importance of these regulations. So Sarbanes-Oxley does exist in life sciences. It exists in many other industries. It's a U.S. federal regulation. It protects investors from the possibility of fraudulent accounting activities by corporation, right? That's a fairly straightforward one. HIPAA, you may have heard of this one, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It's also a U.S. federal regulation that provides data privacy and security provisions for safeguarding medical information. GXP, this is probably new if you're not familiar with life sciences. It's a general abbreviation that stands for the good practice, quality guidelines, and regulations. And the X stands for the various fields, including the pharmaceutical and food industries. For example, good laboratory practice, or GLP. And if you see the letter C in front of the GXP, so it's CGXP, that's sometimes added, and it means current. 21 CFR Part 11 is very familiar to everyone that works in IT. in project management and life sciences, but maybe not be familiar to you. It stands for this is a mouthful, Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, and it establishes the United States Food and Drug Administration regulations on electronic records and electronic signatures. So 21 CFR 11, it requires that closed computer systems, they must have a collection of technology and procedural controls to protect the data within the system. And open computer systems must also include controls to ensure that all records are authentic and incorruptible, and where applicable, confidential. It's this regulation that serves as the basis for QA validation, remember I mentioned that before, in the software development lifecycle. So here we go, now the fun begins. The very word, quote, validation is what I'd consider a reserved word. And in life sciences, it has a very distinct meaning of a particularly time-consuming set of tasks. So you need to adjust your daily vocabulary when you're talking to your life sciences colleagues. Instead of saying validate when you mean let me double check that or recheck, you're gonna need to learn to say verify instead. And you wanna do that because you might scare off a bunch of people with the word validation, or worse, you might use the term innocently, but you're understood literally. That would be pretty bad.
All right, so let's discuss the impact of validation on the SDLC process. These two charts are representative. Depending on the company you go into, they could have their own definition for what their SDLC is. Standard, plan, define, design, build, test, deploy. From a representative standpoint, what's the difference of the typical SDLC to one in life sciences? Well, they're similar, but there's a lot more rigor around the documentation in all phases. So that would be around the requirements, the system setup, how you implement it, and then the testing of everything of the actual system during the deployment phase, and then even after go live. So I'm not going to drill too much on this, but just say that it is representative to focus on where a section is integrate, test, and validate. It's not just a test. You have to do more than just a test. There's more rigor around it. You don't just deploy it, you install, qualify, and implement. These are words that we're using here that you often hear in the life science industry. So it mentioned about the document comparisons. I love this chart. And it shows just in quantity, what the difference between a non-validated and a validated environment is. Again, typical from our mutual experience. Most companies have a URS, user requirement specification. They have an FRS, functional requirement specification. But what's that thing between them, a validation plan? Well, in the life science space, that you may have user requirements, but before you then start on building your functional requirements, you have to have a validation plan that says, here's what I'm going to do. And in that, you need to list the steps, the documents that need to be generated, and that is your entire plan for what needs to be performed, executed, tested, and then closed at the end. And there's a recent project that I was on that because the size of the project and the complexity, there were 50 different documents that were required as part of that.
50.
Right. And then let's look at another difference between the validated project. Down on the left, about the fourth line down where it says trace matrix. What's that? Some businesses that are not validated may have that, probably not from what I've seen. So a trace matrix, also known as a requirements traceability matrix, also known as a requirements matrix. And in that document, you trace the requirements in the URS to the FRS. It could be one-to-one, could be one-to-many, could be many-to-one. So here's this user requirement, and here is the one or more functional requirements that satisfies that. The URS is here's what the user needs. The functional is what's actually how the system will satisfy that. And you have to document that in a trace matrix, and everything needs to be accounted for. In the left-hand chart, we'll see that there's a UAT, user acceptance test. That's pretty standard to have some level of testing before things go live. It's good practice, right?
Yeah, of course.
In the validated space, sometimes it's referred to as PQ, performance qualification, sometimes as UAT, depending on how you're setting up your documentation and your validation plan. And the trace matrix will trace not just the user requirements to the functional requirements, but the functional requirements to the user acceptance test. And from my experience, not only are there more documents for a validated process, but the depth of detail and rigor is much more comprehensive in a validated project. And why? Well, these are the documents that if the FDA were to come in and they were audit your system or your processes, they would say, well, show me what are the requirements, how did you test it, how did you build it? Speaking of how did you build it, is you, instead of just performing, having a set of instructions that say you build and you install and that's it, you have to go through something called an IQ. And that's called installation qualification.
Right.
And you have to document clearly, here's how we implemented the system, everything from networking, connectivity to configuration. You don't just do that once, you do that twice, 3 times, because you have to do it in a development instance. Then you have to use that document to do it in a validation instance, sometimes called the test instance. Then you need to do it again in the production instance.
Yeah. Any
deviations to that documentation, you have to work with the quality department. You have to make sure you could have to write a deviation report. You have to document in some manner. And the level of detail includes how you write the dates, how you write the signatures.
Yeah.
It may seem laborious. It may seem excessive to a lot of people in a lot of industries. Let's go back to the earlier slides that these are systems that support the investigation of drugs that ultimately deal with humans and ultimately can, ideally is expected to, is save lives. It impacts lives.
Sure.
So there have been some instances where a company did not fully document what they did. What happened? Well, it was found because there was some sort of quality problem with one of their products.
Mm-hmm.
The FDA came in, they realized, oh, you didn't adhere to this, you didn't do what you said you did, or you didn't document it well enough. We're going to impose quite a hefty fine on you. You can even go out of business.
Yeah.
It's not unheard of. It is very important to understand the rules of running validated projects, adhere to the rules of running a validated project, and when the project manager, make sure everyone around you knows that.
Yeah, so getting back to my earlier point about asking your ITPM friends who work in life sciences about their experiences with ITQA on validated projects, you might hear some war wound stories of systems with delayed go lives because validation testing didn't go so well. And that's where stakeholder management and communication and just being an awesome ITPM will really come into play. So
we'll talk to the key. We'll talk about some keys of leading validated projects.
Yeah. So I think it's important. You have to understand the regulations and when they apply. So we talked about 21 CFR Part 11. CSV is computer system validation. GXP we've talked about. Planning is paramount. As documentation creation and approvals, as we just saw on that previous slide with the sheer number of documents that are needed, and Ron mentioned he had 50 on one project. Each of those documents have their own life cycle. So in my schedule, as a rule of thumb, I usually schedule for one document at least a week to draft it, at least a week to review it, and at least a week to approve it. So just imagine that's 3 weeks in the schedule for one document. And that could go infinitely longer if it was a bigger document and had more granularity. So testing, execution, and potential retest, experience will quickly tell you, and I'm here to tell you, add buffer into your schedule for anticipated delays due to failed test scripts. And those might be required to be remediated before you move on. And who knows how long that remediation could take. So even if the go live is needed by a certain date, you can never really be too sure that you're going to hit that because you may encounter last minute things with validation. So the QA process of validation is more important than meeting your go live because of the audit possibilities that Ron just talked about. When we're talking about user access at deployment that adheres to computer system validation controls, that means usually before a system goes live, there's a series of training that's required. And you can't give access to the folks unless they're properly trained. So you usually have a system that's mandatory and tracking your training. And that needs to be all up to date before you can give access. So just be aware of these things as potential hangups and before your end users can gain access. And here's where communication plans and marketing campaigns can really help. And lastly, on this slide, assure qualified personnel in each project team role. So each and every project I've been on and Ron's been on, we've learned through the process, right? Every project's different and they're all nuanced, but each team member probably would say the same thing. But there's a common theme for successful projects, and that's that each team member was competent in their role. And I know this is fundamental project management, and you probably heard that before, but the impact of a non-performing team member on a validated project, it might not just put your schedule at risk and your budget at risk, but also the entire company if there are gaps in adherence to validation.
Right. That's really important. That's our job as project managers, is to make sure that our team is performing. And if not, we need to be able to escalate it to our management to be able to make sure that our projects are successful, because that's how the company is successful. So let's talk about a summary of the presentation and what's crucial to managing validated projects, regardless of the segment within life sciences. So it's important to understand what the rules and regulations are, when they apply, how they apply. Kristen gave a great definition or explanation of the different parts. You're not expected to know everything walking in day one. Right. Having an awareness and how it applies to what project you wish to lead as an ITPM, that's what's really important. Being able to talk to an understanding and how it applies. There's the different CSV types, etc. How do I get into life sciences as an ITPM? Well, we spoke about that. There's the transition method. Treat it like a project plan.
Right.
And there is very likely you have experience that even if you're not in life sciences now, that your experience could be applied to life sciences company. It's a matter of finding out how. And what are the key things to know when leading an IT project in life sciences? At the most basic fundamental level, it's the same project management skills in any industry. Then it gets into, if you're leading one that's in the validated space, is understanding, okay, what's important for me and my team to know so I can lead them to success.
So I think now we can finally start to answer that original question of how can I get into IT project management and life sciences if I don't have a science background and I have no experience in life sciences. And that is, if you wish to get into life sciences and you don't have the background, here's our advice, right? Get to know the industry. You've said that before. We've spent a lot of years in the industry and we love having an impact on science and technology. Identify the commonalities between life science companies and what you already know, and use that as a starting point to wedge into the new industry. Learn the business acumen. Business acumen is huge in life sciences. It's very heavy, very specific. I've shared some information here. Researching the companies will help you target the industry that you're focused on. And network. Especially those who you already know are in life sciences. Ask them questions about what they do. Ask for mock interviews for open positions so you can hear what questions will be asked. And link in to Ron and myself. I mean, we have large networks in life sciences that could potentially help you. And let us know if you've had success. If after hearing this webinar, your feedback is gold to us. So what do you think, Ron? Anything to add?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to add something about the network. As someone who is a self-proclaimed introvert, because I believe I am, learned extrovert. Well, no, I played the roles.
You do play the role.
Yeah. Networking, it doesn't have to be hard. Go into it, again, thinking that people want to help you just as you would want to help someone else. And a lot of people like to talk about what they enjoy doing.
It's true.
Kristen described the passion of life sciences. That is a common theme throughout the industry, regardless of the roles. So you don't need to go look for a life science ITPM. Go look for someone who works in the clinical space, someone who works in infrastructure. Scientist, someone who works in marketing, and listen to them, because it could be a PM that's supporting them in their project. So you will still learn and have a good conversation.
That's right.
Yeah. So let's talk about some next steps. Again, being a project management presentation, we need action items and next steps.
Yeah, we do have some.
So we do expect this introduction to be the first in a series of webinars. We've heard of future topics. There are some that we had in mind and people have come to us. For instance, IT project validation. We've gone at length to discussing the challenges, but what happens when it moves to the cloud? Well, some things are made easier, yet some things are made harder. Yeah, exactly what? I'm involved in some work now that's helping me understand that, but that could be a good conversation.
Yeah, validation is always a good topic of conversation.
Yeah. And we've had people not just who have suggested other topics, but they would be willing to come in and talk with as well. So we're welcome to feedback.
Some guest hosts.
Yep. Biopharma IT projects by area, because there are some differences between projects and research which aren't necessarily validated and looking a lot of scientific development, more data oriented. I'm using a lot of SAS.
Heavily validated.
And then manufacturing, getting to a lot of GMP. And
heavily validated.
Could be the marketing.
Yep.
There's medical device IT projects. We have friends who would like to share their information.
Yeah, I think there's some folks on this webinar who are from the medical device community. Come forward. We'd love you to co-host with us.
Yeah. or or suggest what's important to you.
Yeah.
So we can find someone who will. Life science program and project management, something, Kristen, that's near and dear to your heart
Yeah,
right now.
that's right. I'm doing a lot of that.
Yeah. So questions, feedback, suggestions, feel free to reach out to us or send them to the webinar team at hawkinspointpartners.com. We already do have suggest recommendations for improvement, opportunities for improvement.
Yeah.
Because one of the feedback items we've already heard about is the registration process for this.
Yeah.
And this was a first co-hosting it with PMI, and I want to thank John Todd and everyone at PMI. We've been getting a lot out of it. Happy to do our part in helping build that. The networking that PMI offers could be invaluable to you as you want to advance in your career.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah.
Great.
So, Kristen, I think that covers it.
That's it. Thank you for attending.
See any final slide? Yep. The final slide is the thank you one from the PMI.
That's it.
So those of you who are on for PDUs, you can contact the office at PMI Mass Bay or for details on how to claim your PDUs, or they may have provided that information for you already.
Super. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to attend today. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot. Take care.